So this is going to demonstrate some of the fundamental parts of DT and DTQL and basically show you how we build an app from scratch. We usually, when we build one of these cantrips, we try to find an open data source like something from data.gov, but you can grab pretty much anything and the blueprints will be able to eat it. So for this tutorial, we went to the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau to their winery permits. And there's a section of data down here where you can get lists for, since we're in Missouri, we'll do this set. You can pull up all of the, basically a spreadsheet of people who hold current permits for wine distribution. So we pulled that data set down and made sure it was a well-formatted CSV file. So the basic idea is we want to take that list of wineries and turn it into a useful API. And ideally, we don't just want an API that's a one-use thing. We might build 3 or 4 apps from the same data set. So we want to try to modularize the set of data and the models that represent it. And so we do this basically so that we can build faster and faster apps as we gather more functionality. There's a bunch of requirements listed here, but we have them all installed, so we're going to skip that part. To get started building DT cantrip, we have a generator called Expressive App. So I'm going to go to my sites directory, and I'm going to make a directory called Vino. And I'm going to change into that directory. And from here, this is now my project directory. I'm going to run yo expressive app. And what this is going to do is run us through a series of template downloads and package setup. I'm going to accept all the default values because it's pretty much ready to go for a local development environment as is. So we're going to use SQLite as our data store. We're going to set up the API on 8888. We're going to set up the relay on 8887. App name will be site, port 8000. Now we can watch it make all of our package files. So it's setting up our site for us, installing all the required modules that we start with. Generators are not really that complicated. I actually have a tutorial written up on how to build your own generator in case you have an architecture that's different than ours, because DeepThought doesn't actually care about this particular structure. This is just the way that we do it. Mm-hmm. So you can actually, instead of writing a generator that makes you use that architecture no matter what, we actually just show you how to write a generator so you can modify whatever structures you want. But we have a certain way to do it so that our developers know where to expect things. So,
is this similar like on a Windows platform, or is it?
Yes, there are some things. If you use the Docker toolbox, it's exactly the same. If you use the native Docker for Windows, there's actually some permissions issues with writable databases and containers. And so we usually set up with MySQL for that. But most of the process is the same, like 99.999% of it. The only difference is that you have to set up a MySQL database. And we actually have some makefile commands that do that same process. You just run a different command at one point, and then that's it. And you're set up. So this is pulling down 3 repositories that we start with for our templates, which are detailed here in the project structure section. Basically, the API is what your data comes from. It's the layer above the database that provides a RESTful API to the data. The relay, which you're very familiar with, which is the endpoint for the application and facilitates the communication of the API, especially when we have to do things like authentication. It does the OAuth dance for us and takes care of everything. So for the most part, you won't touch that, especially in this tutorial, but later we might run some delegates there or something like that. But it's pretty much ready to go out of the box. The site is the actual front-end UI. We use Angular 1.5 or 1.6 and a Webpack setup. So we basically build our sites from that. We have a little bit different structure than is typical, but it's not too hard to figure out. This is the same way that we build a mobile app. We actually just make a branch of the site repository and set it up for mobile, run the Cordova build in it, and make a couple of file modifications to smooth out some edges, and then we have a mobile app out of the same code base. All right, so this says that everything's good to go. Let's go ahead and test the app, make sure that everything works well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go Docker compose up, which you can see is the first line of instructions of testing the app. And this will actually boot up 3 containers, the API, the relay, and the site. At this point now, these containers are available on my local host on ports 8000, 8887, and 8888. So I can visit those to see what's going on. But we have a couple of other setup steps we're going to do first. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run make clean to make sure that my database actually gets created, all the structure gets put in place. You'll see when this runs how many modules are already in place to help us out.
Is make clean something you wrote, or is it?
Yeah, make is a basic, like a very old installer sort of thing. Like you put shell commands in it, and then you run the command, and it'll go through that series. So I can show you that in a sec. Basically what this did is it ran through any plugins that we've added and executes the DTQL files for them. So we've updated the version 1.0 and 1.0.1 for our authentication and OAuth plugins. It also does the same thing, goes through the relay and makes sure that we have all the structures built. And then it actually will go through our local application and build everything there. So as we make changes, we'll actually run this make clean command over and over again to rebuild our structure. Anytime that you want to wipe the data, it's totally fine to just run this command over and over. And I can actually show you the make file if you're curious about what's in there. So a make file is just basically a collection of commands. In this case, we have this structure clean, and this is what we just ran, and that executes the commands that you just saw. It basically wipes our development database, goes to all the migrations folders, finds everything that matches our SQL files or DTQL files in migrations, and then migrates the structures and then runs a couple of data sets that we have. So this is basically commands that you could execute or customize. This is DTQL in action, especially if you look at right here, we're actually running DTQL migrate to get the structures up and running.
Okay, yeah.
So, and we can go through those commands in more detail. In fact, if you get DTQL, you can DTQL, you can run the help at any time to get the list of commands that are available. So you can see everything, but for this particular part of the process, we're just going to run migrate. Later, we're going to use scrape to bring in the winery data. At this point, we've run make clean successfully. We're going to build the app by running webpack. This is actually going to take all the JavaScript that the site has, pack it together, put it in a single file, and place in the public folder so that it's available for download during the site request. All right, so now that's packed together. If you want to actually look at this app, we can visit localhost 8000, and we can see that it actually has pulled up a functional site. Our database should now be here, so you can see the database. All of these tables are created by our plugins, so we haven't done any work, but we've already got a sample user built in. We've got all the consumers for OAuth set up. We have the relay tables set up. Everything is good to go. We have in this DT migration table, you can actually see the plugins that are installed and what versions they're at. And we use that later when we make changes to a plugin and it needs to update the schema. It'll actually automatically execute because it keeps track of it here. So we're in the site. When I click on the user's navigation item, it actually, because users is a secure API endpoint that we hit, it automatically triggers the OAuth process, sends us to the login with an OAuth token, and now I have to log in to actually get it to let me view that API. So when I hit login, it's going to make that request again, and I end up here. So now we can see the list of users. So this is a protected API. You can't hit it without a valid OAuth token. Okay, so that's pretty good for running a generator and then hitting the go button. We already have an authenticated OAuth-based API. There's lots of other magic tricks behind that, but now we're ready to actually focus on our winery data.